The sky above Velthara Prime burned with falling metal and fire as the orbital bombardment continued into its third day. Lieutenant Maya Brooks pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the ancient ruins, while explosions shook the ground beneath her boots. Her squad had been sent to destroy a Dominion supply depot, hidden somewhere in these ruins, but now half her team was dead, and the rest were scattered across the battlefield. She checked her weapon and counted her remaining ammunition with trembling fingers. The ruins around her were old beyond measure, with carved pillars rising into the smoke-filled sky like the bones of giants. Somewhere in these same ruins, another warrior moved through the shadows with deadly purpose. Cylindris Nightwhisper was a shadow walker of the Silvari people, and she had been tracking human movements for 3 days without rest. Her mission was simple enough to find and eliminate a high-value human target who was coordinating attacks against Dominion forces. She moved silently through the corridors with her bonded dragon Ashvir, flying high above the ruins keeping watch. The dragon was young but powerful, with silver-blue scales that caught the light. From the burning sky, through their mental bond, Cylindris could feel his concern for her safety and his eagerness to join the fight. She sent calming thoughts back to him, telling him to stay high and watch for enemy movements. The bond between a Silvari and their dragon was sacred and unbreakable, lasting until death claimed one or both of them. Ashvir had chosen her when he was barely hatched, and now 5 years later they fought together as one. Above them both, the bombardment reached a terrible new intensity, as a massive explosion lit up the northern horizon. Maya saw the flash and felt the ground shake harder than before. She activated her radio but heard only static and screaming voices cutting in and out. One of her teammates managed to get through long enough to shout a warning about the dam. The northern dam had been hit, and millions of tons of water were now racing down the canyon system toward their position. Maya felt ice run through her veins as she realized what this meant. The ruins sat at the bottom of a dried riverbed that had not seen water in centuries, but now that was about to change. She started running toward higher ground, shouting warnings to anyone who could hear her. Cylindris heard the distant roar before she understood what it meant. Ashvir sent her a burst of alarm through their bond, showing her an image of water surging through the canyons like a living thing. She cursed in the ancient tongue of her people and began climbing toward the upper levels of the ruins. The dragon swooped low, calling out to her, but she commanded him to fly high and stay safe. He was too large to follow her through the narrow passages she would need to use to escape the flood. The roar grew louder with each passing second, until it sounded like thunder that never ended. Maya reached what she thought was higher ground, but then she saw the wall of water coming around the bend of the canyon. It was taller than the buildings in her home city back on Earth, a churning mass of brown water filled with debris and broken trees. She had seconds to make a choice, and she chose to run deeper into the ruins, hoping to find shelter in the underground chambers. Cylindris made the same choice at almost the same moment, entering the ruins from the opposite side. The water hit like the fist of an angry god, smashing through the ancient stone and sweeping away everything in its path. Maya was thrown off her feet and slammed into a wall before the current dragged her down into darkness. Her combat armor was heavy with plates designed to stop energy weapons and projectiles. In the water it became an anchor, pulling her down toward the bottom. She fought against the current trying to reach the surface, but her lungs burned and her vision began to darken. Her training took over and she started releasing the catches on her armor, letting pieces fall away one by one. First the chest plate, then the shoulder guards, then the arm pieces. Her weapon was torn from her grip and disappeared into the murky water. She kicked toward what she hoped was up, and finally broke the surface, gasping for air. The current swept her through a collapsed section of wall and into a flooded tunnel system. Cylindris faced the same terrible choice as the water filled the chamber where she had taken shelter. Her enchanted plate armor had served her well in countless battles, but now it was killing her. The metal was heavy, and the enchantments that normally made it responsive to her movements did nothing against the weight of water. She released the bindings and let the armor fall away. Piece by piece, watching centuries of craftsmanship sink into the depths, her weapons followed, and then her communication device and emergency supplies. All the tools of war that had defined her for so long were gone in moments. She swam desperately through the flooded passages, following the current because fighting it was impossible. Ashvir roared above the ruins, his cry filled with fear and rage. He could feel her terror through their bond, but he could not reach her. The passages were too narrow and filling with water too quickly. He circled above, calling out again and again, but there was no response except the roar of the flood. Both warriors were swept through the ancient tunnel systems, each alone in the darkness. The water carried them deeper underground, through passages that had been sealed for thousands of years. Maya slammed into walls and was scraped across rough stone floors, unable to control her movement. She managed to grab onto a metal grating, but the force of the water tore it free, and she tumbled onward. Her body was covered in cuts and bruises, and her strength was fading fast. Cylindris fared no better despite her superior Sylvari senses and reflexes. The water showed no mercy to anyone, dragging her through the depths like a leaf in a storm. She tried to maintain her sense of direction but soon gave up and simply focused on surviving. Time lost all meaning in the darkness. It could have been minutes or hours before the current finally began to slow. Maya felt the water depositing her on a rocky shore, and she crawled forward on her hands and knees. Her body shook with cold and exhaustion, and she collapsed onto the stones, unable to move further. She lay there breathing hard and trying to understand where she was. Somewhere in the darkness she could hear water dripping and the echo of vast empty spaces. She was in a cave or cavern of some kind, deep underground with no light except a faint blue glow coming from the walls themselves. The stones around her seemed to pulse with their own luminescence, casting strange shadows. Cylindris washed up on a different shore, in what seemed to be the same massive cavern. She pulled herself away from the water and checked herself for injuries. Nothing was broken, but everything hurt, and she had lost all her equipment. She was alone in the dark without weapons or armor or any way to contact her. People. Through her bond, she could still feel Ashvir far above, searching frantically for a way to reach her. She sent him reassurance and told him to stay safe and wait. Then she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Somewhere in the darkness, metal scraped against stone, and ancient machinery hummed to life. Red lights began appearing in the walls, like eyes opening after a long sleep. She realized with growing horror that their presence had awakened something that had been dormant for ages. Maya heard the same sounds and forced herself to stand on shaking legs. She looked around the cavern and saw the red lights multiplying in the darkness. Then she saw movement, and a shape emerged from the shadows. It was made of metal and stone, with joints that clicked and whirred as it moved. The machine was as tall as 3 men with arms that ended in weapons she did not recognize. It turned toward her, and the red lights focused on where she stood. Maya started running. Maya ran through the darkness with the sound of mechanical footsteps echoing behind her. The ancient war machine pursued her with steady determination, its red eyes cutting through the gloom. She had no weapon and no armor, and no idea where she was going. The cavern seemed endless, with pillars rising into shadows and passages branching off in every direction. She chose one at random and sprinted down a corridor lined with more of the glowing blue stones. Behind her, the machine crashed through obstacles without slowing its pace, methodical and terrifying. Cylindris heard the commotion and moved toward it despite every instinct telling her to hide. She needed to understand what was happening in this place, and the sounds of pursuit meant someone else was here. As she rounded a corner, she saw the machine and recognized it immediately from the old histories. It was a sentinel from the time before the Dominion, when the galaxy was ruled by different powers. These machines had been created to guard something precious, and they never stopped once activated. Then she saw the human woman running ahead of the sentinel, stumbling with exhaustion. Cylindris made a decision that went against all her training and threw a piece of rubble at the machine. The rock bounced off its metal body but succeeded in drawing its attention. The sentinel stopped pursuing Maya and turned its glowing eyes toward Cylindris. Instead, Maya collapsed against a wall, gasping for air, and looked back to see what had happened. She saw a figure standing in the corridor facing down the war machine. The figure was tall and thin with silver hair that seemed to glow in the blue light. Maya realized with shock that it was one of the Sylvari, the alien warriors who had been trying to kill her and her squad for months. The sentinel advanced on Cylindris, with weapons powering up along its arms. Cylindris dodged to the side as a beam of energy carved through the stone where she had been standing. She was fast even without her armor, moving with grace that seemed impossible. But speed alone would not save her against a machine that felt no pain and never tired. Maya watched the Sylvari woman dodge and weave, knowing she should just run and escape. But something made her stay and look for a way to help. She spotted a crack in the ceiling where water was dripping through, and remembered her engineering training. The ancient stone was unstable, and with the right application of force, it might collapse. She found a loose piece of metal framework and began prying at the weakened stone. Cylindris was running out of room to dodge when she heard a cracking sound above. She looked up just as a section of ceiling collapsed onto the sentinel, burying it under tons of rock and debris. The machine struggled beneath the rubble but was pinned and unable to move. Cylindris turned to see the human woman holding a piece of metal and breathing hard. Their eyes met across the corridor, and for a moment neither moved. Maya saw the Sylvari woman clearly for the first time. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way with features that were almost human but not quite. Her eyes were larger and tilted and her ears came to elegant points. Her skin had a faint, silvery sheen, and her wet hair clung to her face and shoulders. She wore only the thin undersuit that went beneath armor, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Cylindris studied the human with equal intensity. She had expected humans to be crude and brutish, but this woman had shown quick thinking and courage. Her face was covered in cuts and bruises, and her short dark hair was matted with blood. Despite obvious exhaustion, she stood ready to fight or run whatever the situation demanded. Maya raised her empty hands slowly to show she held no weapons. Cylindris did the same though. Her combat training screamed at her that this was foolish. They stood there in silence while water dripped around them, and the buried sentinel groaned beneath the rubble. Maya tried to remember the Sylvari phrases she had learned during intelligence briefings. She spoke slowly and carefully, hoping she was getting the words right. She said that they were both trapped, and both without weapons, and that fighting would help neither of them. Cylindris understood the words, though the accent was terrible. She considered the human woman before her, and thought about the situation they faced. They were deep underground with hostile machines awakening around them. They had no equipment or communication devices and no way to call for help. Logic suggested that cooperation was the only path to survival, even if every instinct rebelled against trusting an enemy. She responded in the human language, which she had studied as part of her mission preparation. Her accent was better than Maya expected, and the words were clear. She said that she agreed to a temporary truce until they could escape this place. Maya felt relief wash through her and nodded acceptance. They stood there awkwardly, unsure how to proceed after agreeing not to kill each other. Then more red lights began appearing in the darkness around them, and the decision was made. They ran together down the corridor away from the awakening machines. The vault was vast beyond comprehension, with chambers and passages extending in every direction. Some rooms were filled with ancient technology that hummed with power. Others contained stone monuments, covered in writing that neither of them could read. They moved quickly but carefully, checking each passage before entering. Maya noticed that Cylindris moved with absolute silence, while she, herself, sounded loud and clumsy in comparison. Cylindris noticed that Maya had an eye for structural weaknesses and potential dangers, spotting unstable floors and walls before they became problems. They made a good team, though neither would have admitted it aloud. After what felt like hours of running and hiding, they found a chamber that seemed safe. The door was thick and could be barred from inside, and there was only one entrance. They collapsed onto the floor, too exhausted to go further. Maya looked at her companion and tried to start a conversation. She asked what this place was, and how the Sylvari woman had ended up here. Cylindris was quiet for a long moment before responding. She explained that these were the ruins of the Vault of Echoes, a legendary place from before her people joined the Dominion. The vault was said to contain weapons and knowledge from a civilization that no longer existed. Most Sylvari believed it was just a myth, but clearly it was real. Maya asked what happened to the civilization that built this place. Cylindris looked away and her expression became guarded. She said that the old histories claimed they were destroyed for refusing to submit to Dominion rule. The early Dominion had been harsh with those who would not bow, and entire species had been erased. Maya felt cold at the casual way this genocide was mentioned. She asked how many species had been destroyed. Cylindris met her eyes and said that no one knew the exact number because the Dominion had burned most of the records. What remained were fragments and whispers of peoples who once filled the stars. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Maya thought about her own people who had only recently begun exploring beyond their home system. Humanity had encountered the Dominion and immediately been met with hostility. Now she understood why the elder races might fear a new species rising to challenge their order. Cylindris watched the human woman process this information. She could see intelligence and determination in those tired eyes. Humans were supposed to be barbaric and short-sighted, but this one seemed thoughtful and capable. It was confusing and unsettling to have her beliefs challenged so directly. She tried to sense Ashvir through their bond, and felt him still searching above. The dragon was injured and exhausted but refused to give up. She sent him feelings of reassurance and love, and told him to rest and conserve his strength. Maya noticed the faraway look in the Sylvari woman and asked if she was well. Cylindris explained about the dragon bond and how she could feel Ashvir even through the layers of stone above them. Maya was amazed by this and asked many questions about how the bond worked. Cylindris found herself answering honestly, describing the connection she shared with her dragon. It was the first real conversation she had ever had with a human. As they talked, the exhaustion began to catch up with both of them. They took turns keeping watch while the other rested, though neither fully trusted the arrangement. When Maya slept, she dreamed of drowning and woke gasping. When Cylindris slept, she dreamed of ancient wars and burning cities. The hours passed slowly in the darkness. Finally, Maya woke from her rest and found Cylindris examining markings on the wall. The Silveri woman had discovered something, and her face showed shock and confusion. Maya came closer and asked what was wrong. Cylindris pointed to symbols carved into the stone. She said these were not written in the language of the civilization that built the vault. Instead, they were written in ancient Silveri from thousands of years ago. But that made no sense because her people had believed this vault was built by an unknown species. Maya looked at the symbols and frowned. She pulled out a small piece of metal she had kept and scratched some marks onto the dust-covered floor. The marks were similar to those on the wall, though not identical. Cylindris stared at the marks, and then at Maya. She demanded to know how a human could write in ancient Silvari script. Maya shook her head and said these were not Silvari letters. They were ancient human. Symbols from the earliest colony ships that left Earth millennia ago. The two women looked at each other as understanding began to dawn. If both their languages shared common roots, then perhaps the connection between their peoples went deeper than anyone knew. They needed to find the central archive of this vault and discover the truth. Together they moved deeper into the darkness, while above them both their militaries converged on the ruins, searching for their missing warriors. The central archive chamber was enormous, with walls that stretched up into darkness beyond the reach of the blue glow. Ancient machines lined the walls, dormant but not dead, waiting for someone to awaken them. Maya and Cylindris entered carefully, watching for more sentinels, but the room remained quiet. In the center stood a platform with a control interface covered in dust and time. Maya approached it slowly and brushed away the accumulated grime. The symbols beneath were familiar in a way that made her heart race. She pressed her hand against the interface and it blazed to life with golden light. Holographic images filled the air around them, showing scenes from thousands of years in the past. Cylindris watched in amazement as history unfolded before her eyes. The images showed a colony ship falling from the sky, damaged and dying. It crashed into the surface of Velthara Prime, and the survivors emerged to find a world rich with resources. They built settlements, and then cities, and eventually a civilization that spread across multiple star systems. These people looked human, with minor variations from adaptation to different worlds. They called themselves the architects, and they were builders and dreamers. Maya watched the images with tears streaming down her face. These were her ancestors, not just metaphorically but literally. Humanity had been here before, had built wonders and reached for the stars. Then the images changed and showed darker times. Ships appeared in the sky above the architect worlds. They were Dominion vessels from an era when the Coalition was younger and more aggressive. The architects were given a choice: submit to Dominion rule or face annihilation. They chose to fight for their independence. The war that followed was brutal and one-sided. The architects had advanced technology, but the Dominion had vast numbers and experience from conquering countless other of species. One by one, the architect worlds fell. The holographic images showed cities burning and populations being systematically eliminated. Maya had to look away from the horror unfolding before her. Cylindris watched with growing shame as she recognized the ships and warriors in the images. Her people, the Silveri, had been there. They were younger members of the Dominion back then, eager to prove themselves worthy. The images showed Silveri soldiers carrying out orders, destroying architect settlements, and hunting down survivors. The genocide was thorough and methodical. When it was complete, the Dominion sealed all records of the architects and forbade anyone from speaking of them. Their crime was not just refusing to submit, but being human. The early Dominion had feared humanity would eventually rise to challenge their control of the galaxy. Better to eliminate them before they became a threat. The holographic display shifted to show one final scene. A small group of architect survivors escaped in a damaged ship. They fled beyond the edges of known space, seeking refuge. The display tracked their path through the stars, and Maya realized where they had gone. They had gone to Earth, to the birthplace of humanity. The survivors had found the ancient homeworld and settled there, joining with the primitive humans who had never left. Over thousands of years, the memory of the architects faded into myth and legend, but their genes remained carried forward in the population. Humanity had returned to the stars because their ancestors had once ruled them. The display faded, and silence filled the chamber. Maya turned to face Cylindris with anger and grief burning in her chest. She demanded to know if the Silvari woman had known about this genocide. Cylindris shook her head, unable to speak. She had known that ancient species had been destroyed by the early Dominion, but she had never known the details. The histories taught to young Silvari spoke of justified wars against threats to galactic peace. No one had told her that her people had helped exterminate the ancestors of their current enemy. Maya wanted to rage and scream, but she could see genuine horror on the Silvari woman's face. Cylindris was as much a victim of lies as anyone, though that did not excuse what her people had done. Cylindris found her voice and spoke with difficulty. She said that this changed everything. That the current war was built on foundations of guilt and fear. The Dominion saw humanity re-emerging into space, and panicked. They started the conflict to prevent humans from learning about the architects and seeking revenge. Every battle and death had been in service of hiding an ancient crime. Maya felt her anger slowly shift towards something more complex. She understood now why the Dominion had reacted with such hostility when humanity began expanding from Earth. They feared the return of the people they had tried to destroy. But that did not justify the genocide, and it did not justify the current war. She looked at Cylindris and saw an ally rather than just an enemy. This Silvari woman had not committed the crimes of her ancestors. She was just another soldier caught up in a conflict neither of them fully understood. Cylindris met Maya's gaze and made a decision that would change her life forever. She said that her people needed to know the truth. The Dominion could not continue hiding behind lies while sending young warriors to die in an unjust war. Maya agreed and said that her people also deserved to know what happened to the architects. Both sides needed to understand the real history before peace could ever be possible. They turned their attention back to the interface, looking for a way to copy the records. Maya discovered that the system could broadcast the information, but doing so would alert anyone monitoring this region. Both their militaries would converge on the vault within hours. Cylindris said that they should do it anyway, that the truth was worth the risk. But before they could activate the broadcast system, the chamber began to shake. Warning lights flashed along the walls, and a voice spoke in ancient human language. The artificial intelligence running the vault had detected their intrusion and reviewed their actions. It determined that they had discovered the truth about the architects. The AI explained that it had standing orders from its creators. If the truth was ever discovered, the vault must be destroyed to prevent the information from spreading. The architects had feared that knowledge of their fate would lead to revenge and eternal war. Better to be forgotten than to have their descendants seek vengeance across the galaxy. A countdown appeared in the air, showing that they had less than 2 hours before the vault exploded. The blast would be powerful enough to level everything for many miles around. Maya frantically searched the interface for a way to stop the self-destruct. Cylindris helped her, checking every system and protocol. They found that the countdown could be halted, but only if they could prove that the two species had learned from the past. The AI required both a human and a Silvari to agree that peace was possible. It seemed simple enough, but Maya knew the challenge ran deeper. They were just two individuals and they could not speak for their entire species. How could they promise that humanity would not seek revenge for genocide? How could they promise that the Dominion would accept the truth and change? Cylindris voiced the same concerns, saying that her superiors would likely order her death once they learned what she knew. Many Dominion leaders had been part of the conspiracy to hide the truth. They would do anything to maintain the secret. Maya said that her own command would face difficult questions if the truth came out. Why had humanity been targeted before even leaving their home system? The political fallout could tear both civilizations apart. They sat in silence, weighing their options. Above them, the countdown continued ticking away. Finally, Maya stood and said that they had to try. Even if their leaders rejected the truth, even if they both faced consequences, they had to give peace a chance. Cylindris agreed, and together they began working on the override protocol. The AI presented them with a test requiring perfect synchronization between a human and Silvari. They had to speak a specific phrase at exactly the same moment in perfect unison. The phrase was in the ancient architect language that had evolved into both modern human speech and Silvari. Maya studied the symbols and tried to sound out the pronunciation. Cylindris did the same, drawing on her knowledge of ancient Silvari roots. They practiced together multiple times, trying to match their timing and inflection. It was harder than it seemed because their languages had diverged over thousands of years. The same root words were pronounced differently in each tongue. After many attempts, they felt ready. They stood before the interface with hands joined. On a count of 3, they spoke the word together. The word meant coexistence, living together in balance. It was the core philosophy of the architects, who had believed in cooperation between different peoples. The AI registered their voices and analyzed the synchronization. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the countdown stopped with 14 minutes remaining. The self-destruct was cancelled, and the vault stabilized. But immediately new alarms began sounding. The ancient pumps that had kept the lower levels dry were failing. Water was flooding back into the chambers they had passed through. The vault was collapsing not from explosion but from the weight of the sea above. They had minutes to escape before the entire complex was underwater. Maya grabbed data chips from the interface, downloading as much information as she could carry. Cylindris did the same, taking copies of the holographic records. They ran from the chamber as water began pouring through cracks in the walls. The passages they had used to reach the archive were already flooded. They needed to find another route to the surface and find it fast. As they climbed through the rising water, they heard sounds above them. Footsteps and voices echoing through the stone. Someone else was in the vault and coming toward them. Maya and Cylindris shared a look, knowing this complicated everything. They did not know if the newcomers were friendly or hostile. All they knew was that time was running out and the water was rising. Behind them, the archive chamber groaned and collapsed, sending a surge of water rushing through the passages. They had to reach the surface before they drowned. And they had to protect the truth they carried no matter what they faced above. The water was chest deep when they heard the roar. Cylindris stopped moving, and her face lit up with joy, despite their desperate situation. She knew that sound better than her own heartbeat. HFY had found a way into the vault. The dragon crashed through a weakened section of ceiling, sending stone and water cascading down. He was magnificent, even with his scales scraped and bleeding from forcing his way through narrow passages. His silver-blue body seemed to glow in the darkness, and his eyes found Cylindris immediately. She waded toward him, calling his name while tears streamed down her face. The dragon lowered his head, and she pressed her forehead against his snout. Their reunion was brief because more sounds came from above. Human soldiers descended through the hole HFY had created. Using ropes and equipment, they wore full combat armor and carried weapons at the ready. Maya recognized the insignia of her unit and felt relief wash through her. Her captain, Lisa Monroe, was among them leading a rescue operation. But the relief turned to alarm when more figures appeared from the opposite direction. Dominion shadow troops emerged from the flooded passages, moving with lethal efficiency. They wore dark armor that seemed to absorb light, and carried weapons designed to kill at range. Leading them was a tall Silvari commander with silver rank markings. Cylindris recognized him immediately, and her blood ran cold. Commander Thalrin Starweave had trained her personally and taught her everything she knew about combat. He was also one of the most loyal servants of the Dominion High Council. If he was here, then the conspiracy ran deep. Thalrin saw Cylindris standing beside a human, and his expression darkened. He ordered her to step away from the enemy, but she refused. Maya stood beside Cylindris, showing that they were together in this. Captain Monroe demanded to know what was happening, asking why her officer was working with Dominion forces. The situation was tense, with both sides armed and ready to fight. Then the ancient war machines activated throughout the vault. Dozens of sentinels emerged from alcoves and sealed chambers drawn by the noise and movement. Their red eyes focused on all the living beings in the complex. They attacked without warning, firing beams of energy that carved through stone and armor alike. The vault erupted into chaos. Human soldiers and Dominion troops found themselves fighting for survival against machines that showed no mercy. The sentinels moved with mechanical precision, targeting anyone within range. Maya grabbed a weapon from a fallen soldier and started firing at the nearest machine. Cylindris pulled energy daggers from a Dominion warrior who no longer needed them. They fought back-to-back, protecting each other while the battle raged around them. HFY breathed lightning across a group of sentinels, frying their circuits. Captain Monroe organized her troops into defensive positions, shouting orders over the noise. Commander Thalrin did the same with his shadow troops, though his eyes never left Cylindris. The water continued rising, making movement difficult and combat treacherous. A sentinel fired at Maya and she dove underwater to avoid the beam. When she surfaced, Cylindris was already engaging the machine with her daggers, finding weak points in its armor. They destroyed it together and moved on to the next threat. Around them, an uneasy cooperation formed. Human soldiers and Dominion troops fought alongside each other against the common enemy. Old hatreds mattered less when faced with immediate annihilation, but Thalrin refused to accept this alliance. He fought his way toward Cylindris, determined to complete his mission. He shouted that she had betrayed the Dominion and must face judgment. Cylindris tried to explain about the archive and the truth they had discovered. Thalrin said he already knew the truth, and that was why he was here. The High Council had sent him to ensure no one left the vault alive. He was willing to die and take everyone with him to protect the secret. Maya heard this and activated the broadcast device she had taken from the archive. She triggered it manually, sending the historical records streaming to every receiver in range. Both human and Dominion forces would receive the transmission. The truth about the architects and their genocide would spread regardless of what happened here. Thalrin realized what she had done, and his face twisted with rage. He raised his weapon to fire at Maya, but Cylindris moved between them. She told her former teacher that the time for lies was over. The Dominion could not hide its crimes forever, and the current war was built on shame, not honor. Thalrin hesitated, faced with the student he had trained and cared for. In that moment of hesitation, a sentinel attacked him from behind. HFY intercepted the machine, taking a blast meant for Thalrin. The dragon cried out in pain and crashed into the water, thrashing. Cylindris screamed and dove after him, trying to help him stay afloat. The water was too deep now, and HFY was too heavy. Maya made a split-second decision and called out to Captain Monroe. Together they organized both human and Dominion troops to help the wounded dragon. Soldiers who had been trying to kill each other minutes ago now worked together to save a life. They used ropes and combined strength to haul HFY toward higher ground. The dragon was barely conscious, but he felt the hands of both species helping him. Through his bond, Cylindris felt his confusion and wonder. Thalrin watched this scene unfold, and something broke inside him. He saw his own troops, ignoring his orders to help their supposed enemies. He saw the human woman who should have let him die instead organizing his rescue. He saw Cylindris looking at him with pity rather than anger. The commander realized that the galaxy had moved on while he clung to ancient hatred. He lowered his weapon, and for the first time in decades felt lost. Captain Monroe approached Maya, demanding a full explanation. Maya handed her one of the data chips and told her to review it later. Right now they needed to escape before the vault collapsed completely. Monroe looked at the organized chaos around her with human and Dominion forces working together. She made the command decision to accept the temporary alliance. She ordered her troops to coordinate with the Dominion forces for evacuation. Some soldiers refused, believing it was a trap. Some Dominion warriors also refused, following Thalrin's example of loyalty to old orders. But most recognized that survival required cooperation. They began moving toward the surface, helping wounded from both sides. The Sentinels continued attacking, but now faced a unified defense. Human weapons combined with Dominion energy shields created effective barriers. Sylvari speed combined with human engineering knowledge found efficient escape routes. Maya and Cylindris led the way, with HFY limping behind them, supported by volunteers. The dragon was young and resilient, and his wounds were already beginning to heal. Through their bond, Cylindris felt his determination to survive so he could protect her in future battles. They reached a large chamber near the surface where water was pouring in through multiple breaches. Captain Monroe analyzed the structural damage and said they had minutes before total collapse. Thalrin appeared beside her and shared intelligence about alternative exits. Together they identified the most stable route, though it meant traveling through flooded sections. The evacuation became a race against time. Soldiers helped each other through underwater passages, sharing breathing equipment. HFY used his body to block falling debris, protecting those who moved beneath him. Maya found herself being pulled through a tight space by a Dominion warrior she would have killed yesterday. Cylindris carried a wounded human soldier on her back, swimming through churning water. The lines between enemy and ally blurred in the face of shared danger. They burst from the vault entrance onto the muddy surface, just as the complex imploded behind them. The ground shook violently, and a massive crater formed where the ancient structure had stood. Everyone collapsed onto solid ground, gasping and shaking with exhaustion. Human and Dominion forces lay mixed together, too tired to separate. Above them, both fleets hung in orbit, having detected the unusual transmissions. The historical records were being reviewed by commanders and politicians. The revelation would change everything, though no one yet knew how. Captain Monroe sat beside Maya and asked if she knew what she had started. Maya looked at Cylindris, who was tending to Ashvir wounds with the help of human medics. She said that she hoped she had started the end of the war. Monroe shook her head and said it would not be that simple. Both governments would face upheaval, and there would be those who wanted the war to continue. Maya agreed but pointed out that at least now both sides knew the truth. Peace was possible if enough people were willing to choose it. Thalrin stood apart from the group, watching his troops interact with human soldiers. Some were sharing supplies while others exchanged stories of the battle. He felt ancient and obsolete, like the machines they had just fought. Cylindris approached him carefully. She said that he had taught her honor and duty but also the courage to question orders. She asked him to question now whether serving a lie was truly honorable. Thalrin looked at his former student and saw the warrior she had become. He admitted that he did not know what to do next, that his entire life had been built on foundations that were crumbling. Cylindris told him that they would figure it out together, that making mistakes did not mean being beyond redemption. The commander nodded slowly, and for the first time in decades allowed himself to doubt his certainty. As the sun set over Velthara Prime, the survivors sat in exhausted silence. They had fought through flood and fire and ancient machines. They had discovered truths that would reshape their civilizations. And they had learned that enemies could become allies when faced with greater threats. But the hardest battles were still ahead, as they returned to their people carrying knowledge that would change the galaxy forever. The ceasefire was announced 12 hours after the vault collapsed. Both fleets received the historical records, and the evidence was impossible to deny. The architects had been real and they had been human, and the Dominion had destroyed them. Politicians on both sides scrambled to control the narrative, but the truth was already spreading. Soldiers who had fought together in the vault told their stories. The footage from the battle showed enemies helping each other survive. Public opinion began shifting in ways that terrified the old guard on both sides. Maya stood in a debriefing room facing her commanding officers. They wanted to know everything about her time in the vault. She told them about the flood and the machines and about working with Cylindris to survive. She showed them the data chips with copies of the architect records. One officer suggested that she had been compromised by enemy contact and should be removed from duty. Captain Monroe stepped forward and defended her, saying that Maya had shown exemplary judgment under impossible circumstances. The debate continued for hours, but eventually Maya was cleared for active duty. However, she was also informed that she would face ongoing scrutiny. Many in the human military did not trust anyone who had worked alongside the enemy. Cylindris faced a harsher judgment from her own people. She was arrested immediately upon returning to Dominion lines. Commander Thalrin was also detained for allowing the truth to escape. They were accused of treason for failing to destroy the vault, and everyone in it. The trial was held quickly, with the High Council seeking to make an example. Cylindris stood before the judges and spoke with calm clarity. She said that she had served the Dominion faithfully for her entire life. She had followed orders and fought in battles she did not fully understand. But she would not continue serving a lie that cost innocent lives. The judges condemned her for speaking this way. They sentenced her to exile, stripping her of rank and honor. Ashvir would be taken from her and given to another warrior. Cylindris felt her heart break at this pronouncement. The bond between dragon and rider was sacred, and separating them was considered a fate worse than death. But before the sentence could be carried out, protests erupted across Dominion worlds. Young Silvari and other species within the coalition demanded answers. They wanted to know why the High Council had hidden the genocide. They wanted to know why the current war was being fought. The unrest grew day by day until the council had no choice but to postpone the exile. Thalrin was also spared, though he remained under house arrest. The commander spent his days reviewing the historical records and coming to terms with his role in perpetuating injustice. 6 months passed, with the war continuing but in a diminished form. Battles still occurred, but with less intensity. Both sides seemed to be going through the motions while waiting for political situations to resolve. Maya was promoted and given command of a new unit. Her mission was officially classified, but everyone knew what she was really doing. She was searching for more architect ruins, trying to piece together the lost history of her people. Her team included volunteers from multiple species, including 2 Silvari scholars who had defected from the Dominion. They traveled from world to world, finding fragments of the ancient civilization. Each discovery added to the growing understanding of who the architects had been. They were builders and artists and scientists who had valued knowledge and cooperation. Their destruction had been a tragedy that echoed through millennia. One day, Maya received an encrypted message while her ship was resupplying at a remote station. The coordinates pointed to an uninhabited moon in a neutral system. There was no signature, but the encryption pattern was one she recognized. She took a small ship without informing her superiors. The journey took 3 days, and she spent the time wondering if this was a trap. When she arrived at the coordinates, she found a massive structure partially buried in the lunar surface. It was another vault, larger and more intact than the first. Standing at the entrance were Cylindris and HFY. The dragon had grown larger in the months since their last meeting. His scales gleamed in the moonlight, and his eyes showed the wisdom of hard-won experience. Cylindris looked thinner, and there were new scars on her face. But her eyes lit up when she saw Maya approaching. They embraced briefly, awkwardly aware of how strange their friendship must seem. Maya asked how Cylindris had escaped the exile sentence. Cylindris explained that sympathetic members of the Dominion had helped her flee. She was now a fugitive hunted by those who wanted to maintain the old order. But she refused to stop seeking the truth about the past. She had spent months searching for this vault, following clues from the first discovery. Maya looked at the sealed entrance and felt a mix of excitement and dread. She asked what Cylindris thought they would find inside. Cylindris said the ancient records suggested this vault contained more than history. It contained weapons technology that the architects had developed. If the Dominion High Council discovered this place, they would destroy it immediately. If the human military found it first, they might use it to finally win the war. Maya understood the implications. Either outcome would result in more death and continued conflict. She asked what Cylindris thought they should do. The Silveri woman smiled grimly and said they should do what they did before. Find the truth together and make sure it served peace rather than war. They approached the entrance together with HFY following behind. The dragon was too large to enter the narrow passages, but he would guard the entrance. His presence would be detected by sensors from both fleets. They had limited time before forces arrived. Inside the vault was pristine, as if it had been sealed yesterday rather than thousands of years ago. The technology hummed with power and the lights activated as they entered. Maya and Cylindris moved through chambers filled with devices they could barely comprehend. There were weapons, yes, but also tools for healing and building. The architects had been preparing for something. In the central chamber they found a message recorded by the last survivors. A holographic figure appeared, speaking in ancient human language. She explained that the architects knew they were losing the war. The Dominion was too powerful, and genocide was inevitable. But they refused to let their knowledge die with them. They had built these vaults to preserve everything they had learned. They hoped that someday their descendants would return and find what was left. The message ended with a plea for wisdom. The holographic figure begged future generations not to use this knowledge for revenge. The architects had believed in peace and cooperation even as they were being destroyed. They wanted their legacy to be hope, not hatred. Maya felt tears on her face as the message faded. Cylindris stood quietly processing what they had heard. Finally, she spoke, saying that they could not let either military claim this vault. The weapons here were too powerful and the temptation to use them would be too great. Maya agreed but asked what alternative they had. Cylindris proposed something radical. They should invite representatives from both sides to come here together, show them what the architects had left behind, and challenge them to choose wisdom over war. It was dangerous and might not work, but it was the only path forward that honored what the architects had stood for. Maya considered this and then nodded. She activated her communication device and sent messages to Captain Monroe. Cylindris sent similar messages to contacts in the Dominion. Within hours, ships from both fleets were approaching the moon. The commanders were suspicious and angry at being summoned by fugitives. But curiosity and the promise of advanced technology drew them in. When the delegations arrived, they found Maya and Cylindris waiting together. Behind them stood the open entrance to the vault. The human and Silveri representatives exchanged hostile looks. Some demanded immediate surrender from the fugitives. Others wanted to secure the vault by force. Maya stepped forward and spoke clearly. She said that they could fight over this technology and continue the cycle of violence. Or they could learn from it together and build something better. She invited them all to enter the vault and hear the message from the architects. Some refused, but others were intrigued. Slowly they filed inside with armed guards and suspicious attitudes. When they reached the central chamber, Maya activated the recording. The holographic architect appeared and told her story of destruction and hope. The message spoke directly to the assembled representatives. By the end, many were openly crying while others stood in stunned silence. Captain Monroe approached Maya and asked if she understood what she was asking. Creating peace would mean changing everything about how their societies operated. It would mean hard conversations and difficult compromises. Maya said she understood but believed it was worth trying. The alternative was endless war with no winners. A Dominion general stepped forward and surprised everyone by agreeing. He said that he had spent his life fighting but was tired of sending young warriors to die for lies. If peace was possible, he wanted to at least try. Others voiced similar sentiments, though some remained hostile. The debate continued for hours in the vault beneath the moon, both sides examining the architect technology and discussing its implications. Gradually, a consensus formed. They would establish a joint commission to study the vaults together. They would share the technology equally and use it for defensive purposes only. They would work toward a formal peace treaty, though it would take time. Not everyone agreed, and some walked out, vowing to continue the fight, but enough remained to give hope a chance. As the delegations prepared to return to their fleets, Maya and Cylindris stood with Ashvir, watching the ships depart. They knew their own futures were uncertain. Both were still technically fugitives, and many wanted them punished for defying orders. But they had started something that could not be easily stopped. The truth was out there, and people were beginning to question the war. Captain Monroe approached before boarding her shuttle. She told Maya that she was being recalled to command. There would be a hearing to determine her fate. But Monroe promised to speak in her defense and said that many others would do the same. Cylindris received similar messages from sympathetic Dominion contacts. Her exile order remained, but there was growing pressure to overturn it. She would have to surrender herself for trial. But there was hope that she might eventually be pardoned. Maya and Cylindris stood together one last time before parting. They promised to testify truthfully about everything that had happened. They vowed to continue working for peace regardless of the personal cost. Ashvir lowered his head and allowed Maya to touch his scales. It was an honor rarely given to non-Silvari. Through the dragon, Cylindris showed Maya that their bond extended beyond species and politics. They were connected now by shared experience and common purpose. As Maya boarded her ship to return home, she thought about everything that had happened since the flood. She had lost her armor and weapons in the water, but she had gained something far more valuable. She had found an unexpected ally and learned that peace was possible even between enemies. The journey ahead would be difficult, with trials and opposition from those who wanted war to continue. But for the first time in years, Maya felt hope. Above Velthara Prime, the fleets began to withdraw. The fighting did not stop completely, but it diminished day by day. Representatives from both sides met to discuss terms. The process was slow and frustrating, with setbacks and arguments, but it continued moving forward. In hidden corners of the galaxy, more architect vaults were discovered. Each one added to the growing understanding of the ancient civilization. Each one reinforced the message of hope and cooperation. Maya and Cylindris became symbols of the peace movement. Their stories spread across both civilizations, inspiring others to question the war. Young soldiers on both sides began refusing orders and demanding explanations. Politicians found it harder to justify continued fighting. Change came slowly, but it came. Years later, when the formal peace treaty was finally signed, Maya and Cylindris stood together as honored witnesses. They had both been pardoned and restored to positions of respect. Ashvir circled above the ceremony, his scales gleaming in the sunlight. The dragon had become a symbol of what was possible when enemies chose cooperation over conflict. As Maya watched the treaty being signed, she thought back to those desperate hours in the flooded vault. She remembered removing her armor piece by piece and thinking she would die. She remembered meeting Cylindris and choosing trust over fear. The rising floodwaters had forced them to remove more than just their gear. They had removed the barriers of hatred and prejudice. It had become complicated because peace was always harder than war, but it was also infinitely more valuable. The waters had receded, but the lessons remained. Two warriors from different worlds had found common ground in the depths, and in doing so they had changed the galaxy forever.